All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are All podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? I actually just recently escaped from the gas station bathroom I recorded the Darkman episode in. And I thought to myself, to celebrate this monumentous occasion of me getting out of that stinky, very poor sounding gas station bathroom I recorded that last episode in, I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to make it right to the audience for having to listen to that terrible audio of mine. So I wanted to do something that I knew our audience would love, which is me, of course, talking about early 20th century Irish history. That's something that the audience have always wanted to hear from me. You know what I mean?
And really, in general, we're known for our in-depth political analysis, for, our discussions of theory and praxis. That's really what we're about here at Millennials Are Old. Really is why we're called MAO. That's what the people expect from us.
Yeah, exactly. And, last week, of course, we reviewed Darkman, which was a Liam Neeson movie. And it turns out there is a movie about early 20th century Irish history starring Liam Neeson in the title role. So you know what? This week, let's review the 1996 epic Irish biopic Michael Collins. But before we get into our review this week, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational Cringe Millennial One of the Week. Woo! Yeah! All right. And, of course, like I said, we're going to be talking about early Irish history, even pre-Republic history, about 100 years ago. And I don't have specifically a cringe generational moment from that period, but I have a cringe generational moment from the modern era of Irish sectarian politics. So this week, I want to talk about our cringe generational segment. And I know, Brian, I already told you a little bit about it when I was in Portland to see you last week. This week, we're going to be talking about Sir Jeffrey Donaldson. Now, Brian, are you familiar with Sir Jeffrey Donaldson other than what I talked to you about?
No, I'm coming in blind. This is going to be a really informative experience for me this week.
Yes. So, once again, we're talking about early Irish history. A lot of that involves sectarian politics, primarily Protestant unionist and Irish nationalist. So I want to cover somebody from a faction that we do not support. I think, Brian, you and I could both agree we are not unionists. You know what I mean?
I don't support the Union of Ireland, the Union of the United States. I don't support labor unions.
No, exactly. We're all against unions and unionism. I mean, we're kidding, obviously. But so real quick, though, so the Protestant unionists in Ireland we're just going to be honest here. They are the settlers of Ireland. That's literally what they are. They see themselves as wholly separate from Irish people. They had an apartheid system during the non-Republican years, during the, UK and Ireland years. They are the settlers of Ireland, and they see themselves that way. They do not see themselves as Irish.
They function in the exact same way in Ireland as they do in India, in any other part of the world that empire is occupied. They function exactly the same.
Exactly. So the former leader of the main unionist party in Northern Ireland, which is unfortunately not a part of the Republic of Ireland, but functionally speaking, the island is pretty close to being fully integrated. Obviously, they're different governments and they're different, under different sovereigns and all that. But functionally at this point, they're basically the same country. Both of them can identify as Irish if they want to. The Irish language is recognized as both a national language in both areas. There's no hard border anymore. So in a lot of ways, it's basically the same country now, but obviously not in actuality. But the leader of what's referred to as the Democratic Unionist Party, which is the current leading unionist party in Northern Ireland, their last leader before this one was a guy by the name, once again, of Sir Jeffrey Donaldson. Now, just getting into a little bit of his history here. So he was in the Ulster Defense Regiment during the Troubles. He was also the campaign manager for the Ulster Unionist Party under Enoch Powell's successful re-election campaign in 1983. Now, Brian, I think you're familiar with Enoch Powell, right?
A bit, yeah, just from tangential readings on imperialism and things and cultural readings, yeah.
So Enoch Powell was a famous, because he's been dead for a long time, was a very famous British racist MP who was so racist he decided to move to Northern Ireland because he just hated not having a place to be a settler in. So in Jeffrey Donaldson ran his campaign in 1983.
He needed to be invading someone else's home. He
exactly.
couldn't live with not doing that. It was beneath him to live in his own country.
Exactly. So Sir Jeffrey Donaldson was the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, which once again was the leading Northern Irish political party for decades. I think since the 70s. And up until very recently, up until I think 2022, now that Sinn Féin, who are the primary nationalist party in Ireland, are the lead political party in Ireland. For literally the first time in its history, Northern Ireland has a native Irish leader in it, which is just wild to think about. But anyways.
Truly unheard of. Something I don't think any of us expected to see really maybe in our lifetime for a certain point, just sort of a thing we were resigned to not experiencing.
No, exactly. And in March 2024, he stepped down as leader of the DUP, having been charged with rape and historical sexual offenses, triggering a leadership election. Now, I do have to say something, Brian, right? I would say the least pedophilic major political party leader in the UK.
In the whole British Isles, yeah.
The least rapey one. But yeah, so, and I just want to get into a little bit of his charges. So on March 28th, 2024, Donaldson was arrested by the Police Service of Northern Ireland and charged with rape and a number of other sexual offenses. His wife also faced similar charges of aiding and abetting relating to the same matter. The following day, he stood down as the leader of the DUP. The Orange Order and the DUP suspended his memberships in March 2024, pending the outcome of the judicial process. So right now, we are still in the process of him even going to trial. But there are apparently 11 offenses that him and his wife are facing. They are 1 count of rape allegedly committed between 1985 and 1991, 1 count of gross indecency towards a child allegedly committed between 2005 or 2006, and 9 counts of indecent assault against a female allegedly committed between 1985 and 2006. And his wife, Eleanor, is once again charged with a lot of these crimes. And there's no trial yet. It's expected to go in March of next year. But you know what, Brian? I think once again, right, we see the just horribleness of settler mindset, right? Like, they see themselves as the just bearers of this land that they don't even claim to be fucking, like, indigenous to.
It's not theirs. They know it's not theirs. That's why they want it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Unionists don't even pretend that they don't even pretend to be Northern Irish. They see themselves as British. It's not about that.
Yeah, they are British. They are loyal to the crown, but they want this land. And not just that they want it, but they want to subjugate the people that are there. I think oftentimes when we talk about imperialism in general, colonialism, or colonialism rather, we sort of talk about the subjugation of the people there as like, almost like anecdotal, like, oh, well, settlers, they want the resources, they want the land, and that leads to the exploitation or the degradation of the indigenous people there. But in most cases, the subjugation of those people is the point. Resources and land, that is an afterthought in the building of empire. The most important part is to subjugate and create a subclass of people.
Exactly, 100%. And being a prolific rapist is definitely part of that too. Oh God. So yeah, I can't wait till we do a follow-up episode in like a year when he finally gets convicted. But until then,
or doesn't get convicted. No, I think he's going. They wouldn't have brought
I think
a guy
so
like
too.
that in if they didn't have it. I'm joking, but the reality is I think if they brought it up on him, then they have him.
And that's the thing, though, too, right, is that, in Northern Ireland, of course, for a long time, Gerry Adams was the leader of Sinn Féin, and he got arrested, for 2 days for a murder that I would say he was almost certainly involved in, just going to be honest with you. But at the same time, they only held him for 2 days. They're like, yeah, I don't think we can really convict you of anything. And that's the guy who literally the UK considered a terrorist for decades. So this guy, who is the leader of the party that basically solidified their power, this guy's being taken to trial for this, and they're not letting it go. I have a hard time believing he's going to get off on these charges.
Something has made them decide that they need to take care of him for their own self-interest.
So chances are this guy's probably going to go away for a while, would be my guess. Although I could be wrong about that, obviously. I could, theoretically. But yeah, so once again, we talked about the cringe generational side of the Irish sectarian conflict. Let's get into the based side. So once again, this is Michael Collins. This movie came out in 1996. And the first trivia fact I had here is, when the film was in production, the IRA exploded a car bomb in London's Canary Wharf, thereby ending a ceasefire in the Northern Ireland conflict. So a lot of people don't know this, but of course, think of IRA, they think of car bombs in Northern Ireland and, political assassinations of British figures, which all those things, of course, did happen. But a lot of people don't realize the IRA detonated a shit ton of bombs in Great Britain. It's crazy how many bombs they did. Canary Wharf, I know about, I think it wasn't Liverpool, I think it was Manchester, but either way, the IRA in England killed probably hundreds of people during the Troubles. It was pretty wild ass time.
Which, yeah, you kind of don't hear about in discussions of the Troubles, although it only makes sense. Of course, there would be activity in England. But yeah, that's sort of, I don't want to say forgotten, but in the broader conversation, we sort of think of it as like a bloodless war for England, which in a sense, maybe,
But no, it definitely was a very heated conflict in both parts of the British Isles, for sure. And then the next fact I had here is this movie was rated R. And the next trivia fact I had here is this movie was actually rated PG in Ireland due to its historical significance, which is hilarious because there's a lot of violence and a lot of swearing in this movie. Although in Ireland, PG is, I believe, functionally equivalent to a PG-13.
That makes a little bit more sense. I mean, to be honest, and I don't give a shit what kids watch. I think kids can watch pretty much anything in context. But I'd like to see what other movies do get rated R in Ireland to see if that's if it makes sense.
I mean, it probably is something like, I don't know, Martin Scorsese movies like rated X, or, Last Temptation of Christ was probably rated X in Ireland, probably because of this
Yeah, that's why
anti-Catholic
I'm like,
sentiment.
because I would say just in terms, without making any value judgments, as far as the maturity level of the content of this movie, probably similar to like a Scorsese film, right?
Oh yeah, like I said, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of assassinations, there's a lot of swearing, although swearing isn't that important, but to us Americans it is. So yeah, the fact that this is rated PG or functionally PG-13 is pretty funny to me, but that's neither here nor there. And this movie was directed and written by Neil Jordan. It was produced by a gentleman by the name of Stephen Woolley. And Neil Jordan is most known for directing, writing, and producing such movies as The Crying Game, which is, I would say, a movie that a lot of straight guys jacked off to until they got to that one scene.
And they were like, "What the fuck?"
They're like, "What the fuck?" He also directed Interview with the Vampire, which is, of course, a very famous movie among goth kids. Of course, this movie, The Brave One, a movie called Greta, and a lot of other movies that he directed that made like $0 at the box office. So very unfortunate for him, but like 90% of his movies were box office failures.
A filmmaker who, and this isn't necessarily a negative thing, very workman-like style based on when I think of all the films that I've seen by him together, a very functional, kind of competent filmmaker with maybe not so much, visual identity necessary.
Yes, definitely not somebody who you would ever call an auteur, that's for sure. I mean, once again, not a bad director, but very much a workman-like director, that's for sure. And then Stephen Woolley is mostly known as a producer, and he produced many things, as I put in my notes, but nothing relevant to this episode besides the Neil Jordan movies he's worked on, so I didn't include any of them. The movie is about 132 minutes long. It had a budget of about $25 million, and it grossed $32.8 million, so technically a box office failure. I don't know if that includes domestic and international, but I'm assuming that probably did not include international. Because the international box office, especially in Ireland, I'm sure was probably pretty significant.
Well, in Ireland, I'm sure, but I can't imagine where else this would be a heavily successful film.
It is.
Who's the mainstream audience for this?
As somebody who is, I wouldn't say I'm like a gigantic historian on like revolutionary Irish history, but even I, as somebody who knows like probably more of it than 99% of Americans, even I was kind of lost throughout some of the movie until I did more research, I'm going to be honest with you.
Well, and it's a good movie. I do think a lot of people would enjoy this movie, even being very ignorant or maybe even mildly unsympathetic to the politics of it. But how do you get those asses in the seats of the theater in 1996 to see this movie?
Brian, once we get to that,
is the most boring title for a movie ever.
And that's the thing, a lot of like Irish like history biopics generally actually have pretty good titles in them. Like it's one of them's like, was it The Wheat That Shakes the Barley or something like that? Or I'm trying to think of the other one. It's the one with Colin Farrell in it that was
Banshees of Inisherin.
Yeah, some of those like Irish history ones have like great titles.
Evocative literary titles that even though you don't know what the fuck it means, it still give you a sense of the type of movie you're gonna see. This is literally just Michael Collins. If you know who he is, I'm sure you're like, based, fuck yeah. But if you don't, like most of us, why were you going to go see that?
One of my neighbors is named Michael Collins. What of it? Like, it's a pretty common
it's a guy. Like, yeah.
And then on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 78% critic score and an 84% audience score. So both critics and audiences like this movie quite a bit. I'm glad it was pretty similar, although I have a hard time thinking about who would watch this, who would seek out this movie primarily and not like it. I feel like that would be a very specific type of person. I mean, a British unionist. A British unionist would watch this movie and hate it. Let's be honest.
Well, but they'll never see it, most likely.
Oh, no. I watched, and before we get to the synopsis here, I do want to have a little bit of context for like modern sectarian conflicts in Northern Ireland. I was watching a Vice video recently where they interviewed, unionists and nationalists, and they interviewed the kneecap guys. I know I talked to you about those guys, Brian. The Irish nationalist, Irish language rappers is the best way to put it. Yeah. I mean, they're definitely more political than they are musical, but they're an interesting band, I'll say that.
It's funny, too, because the way they rap is so like of a different era. It's so like 1990 kind of rapping.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, Brian, is that the 90s recently just came to Ireland. And you want to know how I know that, Brian? Because I was there a few months back, which was part of the impetus for why I wanted to do this movie, along with, of course, the Liam Neeson thing, right? But I can tell you what, Brian, there were so many kids over there with like short haircuts and wearing Adidas tracksuits. And I'm like, is this the 1990s? I saw so many of them.
That's like an in-style with Zoomers in Portland now.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I mean, I know Nike and I think Adidas and both Nike are headquartered in Portland, right?
No, well, I mean, that's also true. But yeah, they love Adidas tracksuits. They love high tops. The girls all wear oversized, like baggy t-shirts and jeans again.
Okay, so maybe it's not a 90s throwback for them necessarily. Maybe they're literally at the cutting edge. I don't fucking
Well,
know.
I think I don't know if this is the case in Ireland, but here it's now that era is now old enough that it's come back around, to being
No,
like
totally. Totally. That's awesome to hear. Honestly, when I go to Portland next time, I hope they're still doing that because I really do want to see those type of people.
I think they, especially the baggy, oversized clothes and like bucket hats. I see a lot of like teenage boys wearing bucket hats.
God, they're gonna be like that guy from God, what the fuck was that 90s band? Gotta Get What You Give band.
The New Radicals.
New Radicals. They look like Gregg Alexander from New Radicals.
I don't know if he's coming back.
Well, he did for the Biden inauguration, so who knows? Maybe he'll do it for the Kamala inauguration. Who knows?
Yeah, that'll happen.
But so speaking of people who don't look like Gregg Alexander from the New Radicals. So once again, this is Michael Collins. Let's get into the synopsis here. So at the close of the Easter Rising in 1916, the besieged Irish Republicans surrendered to the British Army at the Republicans' headquarters in Dublin. Now, I'm already interrupting things here for a little brief history lesson. So Easter Rising happened Easter Monday for about a week in 1916. It was done specifically because Great Britain and unfortunately Ireland was dragged into this because they were still in the same country at the time, into World War I. The Irish leaders under IRA and the Fenians and all these people, right? They said to themselves, well, they're getting annihilated in the Somme right now. They're getting annihilated in Germany or whatever, right? This is the perfect opportunity to take over the offices when nobody's looking, right? And that was the idea. It didn't work because the main leader was like, let's not do this, guys. But not enough people heard about it. So like half the people that were supposed to do it engaged and half the people didn't. So they're already at half the force. There already were. So it was considered a massive failure. It was a massive strategic failure. Apparently the Irish Revolutionary troops were outnumbered like 12-1. Like it was bad. It was a bad move. But interestingly enough, so after that, many of the Irish Republican leaders at the time, including people like, Thomas MacDonagh, Patrick Pearse, Tom Clark, and James Connolly, were all executed at Kilmainham Jail, which is actually a site I went to in Ireland, which if you ever get a chance, go to Ireland, definitely go to Kilmainham Jail. It is a haunting place to go to. You can feel the history. Like you can cut it like with a knife. It is so thick in there. It's crazy. And it's cheap to get in there too. It's only like $8-9, but it's also really hard to get into. I had to look for like weeks just to get a ticket in there because it's basically the national monument of Ireland. So they consider it very, very sacred. They only allow like 20 people in at a time. It's a pretty hard ticket to get into if you're a foreigner, but I was able to get in. So yeah, they executed about 15 of the leaders there. The only major one that they didn't execute was Eamon de Valera, who in this movie is played by Alan Rickman. And the reason he was spared from execution, and they actually said this at the Kilmainham Jail Museum, so I do believe it, is that he was born an American and he had birthright American citizenship. And the reason I think that they didn't execute him was because the Brits wanted the Americans in World War I. They wanted them in there desperately, and they thought that the idea of killing an American citizen due to this was probably a bad look for them. And they were probably correct on that, to be honest with you, because America would later join World War I, but about a year and a half later. So that's the stated reason why Eamon de Valera wasn't killed. But he was one of the only major people in the Easter Rising that was not executed. And, I mentioned James Connolly, right, Brian? So James Connolly is definitely my favorite of the Easter Rising leadership because he was born in Scotland. He went to various places in the Anglosphere. He lived in the US for a while. He was actually one of the founders of the IWW, which a lot of people don't know about. And he moved back to Ireland periodically, and including, once again, to the Easter Rising. He was horribly wounded during the Easter Rising to the point where he couldn't stand and he was basically days away from death. And the UK government at the time, and including, of course, because there was a quote-unquote native Irish sort of parliament in there, but they were basically just a puppet of the UK, right? And they didn't even let him just bleed to death in a hospital. They literally dragged him from his hospital to the Kilmainham jail, tied him to a chair, and executed him. Like that, isn't that just crazy to think about?
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me too about this film is, from all the information Taylor's just laid out, pretty to say the least, politically radical. And the film, for the most part, as far as I can understand, doesn't really compromise on that. But it's really interesting because you are clearly watching a mainstream studio production from the mid-90s. It's very strange.
Yes, about explicitly socialist and communist guerrilla fighter, because that's what the Irish were, or obviously the IRA were.
And it doesn't, I mean, actually, the opening scroll of the film like makes clear that this is about like anti-colonialist, like guerrilla fighters. But the structure of the movie, the performances, the score, it reeks of like, oh, this is like meant to be a popular, accessible film from the 90s, which again begs the question, what audience were they trying to get? Yeah, I'm very curious to know.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised because Neil Jordan, I believe that's his name. Yeah, Neil Jordan is actually Irish. So I wonder if he wanted to do this specifically as like a rallying cry for either besieged populations around the world or just simply to like obviously inform people about the Irish struggle for independence even today. Because like when this movie was released, as I mentioned earlier, like the Troubles were still going on. Like they weren't nearly as hot as they were in like the 70s or 80s, but they were still going on. So like I kind of wonder that myself, right?
Not as a negative. It's just, it's a very kind of a glaring thing when you see this film has a pretty stacked cast, great performers who are all like very recognizable faces. A score that I'm going to tell you, the score to this movie kind of reminds me of like Liar Liar or something, kind of like a 90s family film drama.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know exactly. I didn't pinpoint it, but then you said it. I'm like, okay, no, I hear it. But you know, you're talking about. You're talking about stack cast. So once again, Eamon de Valera, played by Alan Rickman, is spared from execution due to his American citizenship, as I mentioned before, and is imprisoned alongside Michael Collins, played by Liam motherfucking Neeson, and Harry Boland, played by Aidan Quinn. So the movie fast forwards a couple of years. So initially, Michael Collins and Eamon de Valera were given life sentences. It was overturned within like 2 years because like there was so much of a backlash due to the extremely punitive executions that happened among the Easter Rising leaders, and it just pissed off everybody in Ireland. Like, if a lot of people don't know, but the Easter Rising was actually very unpopular in Ireland until the executions happened, and that basically galvanized everybody to be like, oh my god, who are these British fucks? Let's get them the hell out of here. So, and that's the thing that I think is indicative of a lot of independence movements of colonized people, right? Is that the punitive actions of their colonizers are actually used as like a motivator to get them the fuck out. You know what I mean? Like, how many independence struggles are like, oh yeah, the government of this colonizer killed like 10,000 people and now we gotta fucking get them out of here. In places like Vietnam and in Cambodia and, you know,
yeah, it gets the wider population on their side, maybe more so than they would have initially been, because it puts the colonizer force in a position where they demonstrate like how much violence they're willing to commit so that everyone sees it.
And how much they just don't care about the feelings of the population or even the lives of the population. It's like, or also, you know, in the U.S. to obviously lesser extent, the Boston Massacre.
Well, like, I think the point I think that this film really emphasizes, I think it does really well, is the idea that sometimes when we talk about radical political movements, revolutionary movements, liberatory movements, they're sort of presented as like this extreme that doesn't represent the interest or the worldview of the wider populace of a nation. I think ultimately the point this movie make, other than just being, you know, the story of Michael Collins and what he accomplished, is really reflecting that like movements like this are the will of the broader people, that the average person does feel an affinity usually for these liberatory movements. It's not like these weird extremist like college kids or whatever like reactionary forces would have you believe. It's a group that the average person does see themselves in and can identify with.
Exactly. And, you know, even to a lesser, and obviously, like I said, of course, the Easter Rising people, they all died, but I think their deaths were definitely worth something. I think that's what modern Ireland has shown. And, you know, when I went to Ireland, you know, I saw a lot of statues, primarily of James Connolly. Like, James Connolly is the one that, like, really gets recognized, which is interesting because he was the most explicitly communist and socialist out of them, which is wild to me. Like, there's statues of him everywhere. They named the main train station after him. Like, he's a pretty prominent individual in modern Irish history, which like you would never see that in pretty much any other country that's not like, you know, China or Vietnam or Cambodia, where an explicitly far left individual is seen with such reverence. Is kind of wild in an extremely developed Western country, you know. It's crazy to see. But yeah, very interesting for sure. And then moving on to the plot here. So once again, it skips to about 1918. The Irish general election results in the victorious Sinn Féin party unilaterally declaring Irish independence, and in so doing beginning the Irish War of Independence. Now, that's another one, and once again, I got to interrupt the history here. So there was a pre-Sinn Féin pro-independence party that was called I think it was called like the Irish Home Rule Party, I want to say. And they existed for decades before Sinn Féin did. But, Irish Parliamentary Party, that's what it's called, the Irish Parliamentary Party. But they were centrist. They never really went anywhere. And after the UK destroyed the idea of home rule during World War I, that's when Sinn Féin really came and literally destroyed them in the election process. Like, I think in the 1918 election, Sinn Féin got like 95% of the seats, and the Irish Parliamentary Party got like 1. Yeah, like they destroyed them. It wasn't even close. It was like the most landslide election you could possibly imagine. So
incredible.
The Irish Parliamentary Party were destroyed in favor of Sinn Féin, who were far more radical, obviously. De Valera is elected president, and Collins is appointed director of intelligence for the emerging IRA. Ned Broy, played by the actor Stephen Ree, officially a member of the Loyalist G Division, sympathizes with the independence cause and tips Collins off that the castle, so it's called the Dublin Castle, that was the seat of the quote-unquote Irish Parliament at the time, which was once again a puppet of the UK government, intends to arrest the entire cabinet that evening. De Valera, sensing that the arrest will spark a worldwide outcry, dissuades his cabinet from going into hiding and persuades them to allow their arrest to take place. Collins and Boland evade arrest, though there is no response to the wider action. Now, we're going to talk about Broy later, because I'm going to be honest, this is the character that they really fucked over bad in this movie. The way that Broy ends is absolutely not even close to what happened to him in real life. Like, it's actually kind of funny how bad they mangled this, and I really don't know why. Like, I'm not going to say Broy's legacy is great, but let's just say it didn't end like that. You know, it was like, you know, once again with, you know, fucking Marky Mark Wahlberg, it's like, you know, listen, if I was there, it definitely wouldn't have ended up like that. And in real life,
it would have gone down differently.
Hannah Broy was like, actually, it did go a completely different way. You're right, Marky. As the last senior leader free, Collins begins a counterintelligence campaign with help from Broy. Numerous assassinations of agents and Irish collaborators are carried out by the IRA's Dublin Brigade. Now, once again, we're talking about Ireland, right? Is that not all Irish people who were even sympathetic to the idea of Irish causes were nationalist. There were a lot of collaborators, just like with any independence movement. There were a lot of collaborators. There were a lot of people who weren't entirely on board. And there was the Royal Irish Constabulary, which was the main Irish police force, which was almost exclusively stacked with actual like native Irish people who were there to subjugate the Irish people on behalf of the crown. So like this was a pretty complicated government going on here. You know what I mean? So the idea that
a
it was
lot of
all Irish
conflicting
Catholics, yeah, a lot of conflicting motives is a good way to put it. Very conflicting motives, for sure. And then the next fact, and this was one I didn't even believe until I looked it up, but De Valera was actually in Lincoln Prison in Lincolnshire, England, and they actually broke him out of prison and got a ship from Liverpool to bring him back to Ireland. That actually happened in real life. Isn't that crazy? Like, IRA guys went to the other side of England because it was on the northeast side of England, broke him out of jail and brought him all the way back to Ireland. It's crazy.
Sounds like a spy movie device.
Yeah.
Like, really, the idea of actually practically doing like an action like that sounds like an Ian Fleming creation.
Yeah. But no, that literally happened. And listen, we're going to definitely get into De Valera, because De Valera is easily one of the most interesting political figures, maybe of all time. Very complicated legacy, but a very interesting figure for fucking sure. But yeah, so after they break out of the prison, he announces on his return to Ireland that he will go to the United States to seek President Woodrow Wilson's official recognition of the Irish Republic. And by the way, that's hilarious, because knowing Woodrow Wilson's racial opinions, I'm sure he was really excited to hear about that.
Well, like, so one of the interesting things about this scene to me that really struck me is like, there was a period of time when America was still young enough and its place in the world had not been solidified the way that it was after World War II, where you could potentially be like, maybe we can get the president on the side of our like anti-colonizer leftist cause. That was an open question potentially.
Against the world power at the time, because the UK was the world power
who we famously enjoy a special relationship with.
Yeah.
It just shows you how much the perception of America changed in those 20, 25 years.
Yeah, so needless to say, I think Eamon de Valera was definitely a little naive on this one, but that was his idea, right? So the war continues to intensify. The British assigns SIS officer Soames, played by Charles Dance, to counter the Irish Republican Army, though he and several of his agents are killed in an attack orchestrated by Collins, which is awesome because they showed the car bomb, which, from what I understand, right, there weren't actually any car bombings at this point. That was definitely much more of a Troubles era thing, but, you know, they have to include it in here because they wanted to have a little bit of an anachronistic throwback to modern times a little bit, just to show what the level of violence going on at the time probably would have been.
You hate to call this type of real life violence like iconic, but it truly is. It's a type of violence that everyone associates with the conflict in Ireland.
No, 100%, absolutely. To retaliate, the Black and Tans, so once again, the Black and Tans, I got to interrupt. So Black and Tans were a essentially paramilitary force organized by the UK central government to basically, try to get things in order in Ireland. It was mostly employed with former World War I soldiers.
The Freikorps.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. Some native Irish people, but it was mostly, definitely a lot of British former World War I soldiers. And a lot of the things that they did have been extremely infamous in modern Irish history. Black and Tans are definitely not a thing you would just go around and joke about in Ireland, even today. Like, it's same thing with like an Irish car bomb as a drink.
The car bomb thing, yeah.
It's a very sensitive topic, so just don't.
It's an uncool thing to come in from America or wherever and be like, doo-doo.
Well, that's the thing is that there's a fancy restaurant, once again, fancy quote unquote, but it is for Green Bay, it is. But there's a restaurant in Green Bay called Black and Tan, and I'm like, you guys know what that means, right?
Is that really why they call it that?
Well, they have a drink on the menu called the Irish Car Bomb, so they clearly know.
Nasty.
I mean, that's a common name of a drink, but they clearly know. Like,
nasty. Come on. The thing is, like, I'm kind of a shitty, like, overgrown edgelord. Nasty. Uncool. It's also just, like, you're not, like, okay, if Irish people want to say that or whatever, I don't give a shit. That's, like, their country and their collective trauma they live through. Like, you aren't in that country. This is not a thing that you have to carry around in your spirit, the ghost of this violence.
No, and it's not like an Irish bar that's like trying to be a little edgy. That's definitely not what it is. Because I've been there. That's not what the fucking thing's trying to be.
Dumbass like flyover state.
Yeah. So let's get to retaliate. The Black and Tans are sent to Dublin to brutally open fire on unarmed civilians who were in support of an independent Ireland, culminating in a massacre at Croke Park in which 14 people are murdered during a peaceful Gaelic football game. Now, another one I have to interrupt. So technically, the events shown in the film, I don't think are quite true. I don't think they brought out the armored vehicle to mow down spectators, but the Croke Park massacre absolutely happened. That was the original Bloody Sunday, which, of course, became famous in the 70s. But this one, it was at a Gaelic football game, and a lot of people died. A lot of people got injured. And the British government, I think, still denies responsibility to this day, although an independent report by Scotland Yard were basically like, yeah, that was us. Like, they don't even really deny it, but the British government denied it.
How could they deny it? How could they deny it? Who else could have done it?
That's the thing. It's like the hot dog guy from that one show. Like, we're trying to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, I don't understand. That's like George H.W. denying killing Kennedy. Like, who else did it? No, okay,
Brian,
so...
I think you and I can both agree. It was LBJ's dick, okay? It was Jumbo that killed him.
Jumbo,
His dick was
that
so big,
it
went like fucking light speed into his temple and went right back in. That's what happened.
Yeah. They call LBJ's balls the grassy knoll. No, but this scene, so I was already, in watching this film, pretty impressed just by how uncompromisingly radical it is. I think that's one of the first things I'd said to you. Like, I was maybe 20 minutes in, and I was like, oh, this is kind of like a beautiful movie. It was just the idea that this movie exists with, like, stars this big and on this level is kind of incredible. And as it keeps going, like, at this scene, like, it's a mainstream film depicting, like, the violence of empire, like, the wanton murder of, like, working class civilians. And I was like, oh, and it's shocking that he was able to get this movie made. It's very admirable. And it's a rough scene to watch. The idea of your typical American audience watching this scene, I just wonder what someone would have made. What would some normie in 1996 going to see this in the theater have made of this scene where the British Army is, because to most Americans, right? America, Ireland, they're like the same, right? That's how, you know what I mean? How would your average moviegoer in the States perceive this?
You talk about obviously how people perceive it, right? I think that as an American, right, like a hog American, right, I think they would just see it as rah, let's get the bastards kind of thing, like Red Dawn or, Star Wars or whatever. It's because this movie is stylized and the plotting is very similar to a lot of those kind of movies. So I don't think they would necessarily think of the political implications of it, to be honest with you.
No, I think that's really fair. The other thing about this movie is, while it is very upfront about like the methods and motivations of the IRA, it does the thing that a lot of mainstream movies do when they talk about radical figures. And I don't necessarily blame them for doing this. It stops just short of like really explicitly saying, like, there's no part where anyone looks at the screen and says that the British are colonizing Ireland and that's bad. You know what I mean? It's, if you watch it remove from that, you go like, oh, these guys are fighting for their own homeland, and you might never make any sort of political connection to it, or maybe you even like think about it like fucking like a more contemporized Braveheart or something.
No, exactly. And to be fair, this movie did come out a year after Braveheart, so I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people had this in mind.
Which again, I don't blame the movie for. But now that you say that, and I'm thinking about that, like that would make sense.
And then, so Broy's assistance to Collins is also discovered, who is then subsequently tortured and killed. Now, this is once again the part that is ridiculous for history because Broy would survive the events of this film by 50 years. And not only that, he would later become the commissioner of the Garda, which is the Irish police force. So he had a pretty important role in post-independence Ireland. So, like, the idea that he was just murdered and killed by the British is so ridiculous. Like, that's the one part where I'm like, come on, guys. Really?
Things like that in biopics are very frustrating because there's no reason. Like, I can't conceive of any change, even just on a basic narrative level, that putting that fictional occurrence in benefits the movie from. All it does to me is now makes it less reputable as, a document.
No, exactly. So when I first read that, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. This guy survived another 50 years and he
had another movie in him.
Yes, exactly. They literally could have made a movie about this guy on top of it. Like, yeah. I mean, Michael Collins, the sequel to Michael Collins, Eamon Ned Broy, and it's just a movie about a cop, about an Irish
name
cop
for a title.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus. But yeah, so that was definitely the most glaring narrative flaw of this movie by quite a bit. But you know what? We'll have one that other people think is just as glaring, but I don't think so at the very end. But I'll save that obviously to the very end of the synopsis here. But so Dave Valera returns from the USA having been unable to secure President Woodrow Wilson's support. Once again, not surprising. I bet Woodrow Wilson probably had not a lot of very nice things to say about Irish people. I'm just going to be honest with you. So I'm not surprised that he was against this, but hey, whatever.
Did they not, and I don't mean in the film, but I mean like historically, did they not understand like how Irish people were treated? Like maybe the logic was, oh, the US like struck out against England, against the UK or whatever. They'll be sympathetic to what we're doing. And instead of like having some grasp to how the Irish were treated here.
I think what they thought, because of course, however many millions of Irish people went to the US and Canada over those decades, especially after the Irish potato famine in quotes, but honestly it was more like a genocide. But let's not get into that discussion. That's a discussion for another day. But either way, right, after the decades after that and during that period, right, the thing is that I think a lot of them saw how many people went there and they thought, oh, they must be living great lives because millions of people went there, because it's not like they got regular communication back. So I think they thought, oh, well, there's millions of Irish descended people in the US and Canada. Let's see if we can get their support. And then they don't realize it's like, oh, they're treated like basically the same as like black people here. Like I think that a lot of them were probably shocked when they came to America and saw that, to be honest.
And like, so, I do think that makes sense if you as an Irish person are looking at the history of America and going, oh, they're a rival of the British. They'll understand what we're going through.
And it's like, no, they really didn't. It's the enemy of my enemy isn't my friend kind of thing. Oh, God. So the British hint at direct communication with the Irish, though Collins' guerrilla campaign has boded poorly for Ireland's public image. And that's the thing, though, right? They're talking about optics. That's a big thing among, especially leftist and independent circles, is optics, right? But like the thing is that, never mind, we won't get into that part right now. But either way, they see it as optically bad that there's a lot of guerrilla assassinations and guerrilla campaigns going on. But it ended up working good because they eventually declare a Irish Republic, but they want to do it through conventional means. Although Collins is not for that because they don't really have enough members for a standing army. They don't. I mean,
they don't have the means to make that happen.
No. In fact, the way that they got their weapons initially, which is, and they show this in the film, is that they like rob armories and stuff like that. Like they don't have guns to really spare here. They can't really do any kind of army. They have to do, guerrilla, almost stochastic terrorism events to move the needle.
Why guerrilla tactics exist. Like they exist for a practical reason, for small, outnumbered, or, without resources armies.
No, exactly. And adamant in his approach to securing peace, De Valera orders a siege on the custom house, but the IRA suffers a heavy casualty. An attack fails catastrophically. And I read about that, and it's like, yeah, no shit. It's the world's strongest military post-World War I, so they don't even have another conflict to worry about at the moment. And they have all the attention on your little colony. Like, of course they're going to wreck your shit. I don't know.
Yeah, they're literally just like the most refined killing machine up to this point in the history of the world. Yeah, and I think you can say that without hyperbole.
Exactly. Despite the desperate situation in the IRA now finds themselves in, the British unexpectedly call for a cease to the conflict, which that is an interesting little piece of historical like precedent, right? Because like talk about colonizers, right? During the Irish, War of Independence, it only lasted a couple years. So even though Ireland was England's longest running colony, I mean, it's been a colony since at least the 1100s. Like that's how long England basically dominated their neighbor, right? But they only lasted 2 years in a conflict when they're like, yeah, we're done. We'll throw in the towel. And that's kind of wild to think about to me, even though I know Ireland wasn't necessarily one of their wealthiest colonies or anything like that. But it's kind of crazy that they did that because up until this point, really the only colony they ever lost was the U.S.
It's crazy because, like you said, they'd had it for so long. But I think when you look at how much influence the UK had in other parts of the world that were farther away from them and thus less likely to like wreck their shit, it does kind of make sense. They have colonies in India and into like
Africa,
the Middle East and things, Africa. And so it's like, okay, well, these countries they're never going to get near us. They're not an island neighbor to us. So like, yeah, then we'll give up Ireland. What the fuck?
Exactly. A neighbor that you can see from parts of the UK on a clear day. You know what I mean?
Like Cuba. It's their Cuba.
Exactly. So Collins is sent to London to negotiate Irish interests as part of the Anglo-Irish Treaty, which is signed in 1921. Though the Republic of Ireland is not immediately granted independence, the treaty enables Ireland to achieve it over time while remaining a British dominion during the interim, as well as losing 6 of the 9 Ulster counties, which will remain under British control. Now, interestingly enough, except for the part where it's under the crown, that's still basically the British and Irish lines to this day. So in 1922, Collins and other members, I'm sure, but Collins was the main negotiator, was basically like, well, it's Irish home rule. We still have to plead allegiance to the king. We lose 6 counties in the north, which is roughly about like 20% of Irish land, whatever, right? But it's the idea that we're moving towards republicanism. And unlike incrementalists in like the United States to this day, I do personally think that Michael Collins had more of a case for that than like what American incrementalists had, because like the idea that they fought for 2 years, right? And got basically 80-90% of what they wanted already. They just had to keep trying to get the rest of that fucking 20%. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. It was kind of crazy how much they were able to get. Although obviously the pleading, fealty to the king thing still pissed them off, right? But that was more of a symbolic thing. But I understand why that would piss them off, obviously.
Yeah, but it's a little different from what you see in incrementalism in the US, which is like incrementalism towards what?
To no goal, exactly.
Here, they are making a compromise. That sucks, like pleading fealty to the king. That sucks on a morale level, on just an ethical level. That sucks. But I do think, like you said, Collins would have had a case. Like, these are material benefits towards what their goal is. And at this point, obviously, there's already been a lot of violence and a lot of bloodshed on both sides, And maybe on a practical level, you have to go, look, this is what we've got, and this is going to be a lot better for us immediately.
No, totally. And, that was Michael Collins' thing. But Dave Valera, who sought unconditional independence for the Republic of Ireland, is furious upon learning of this. And he and his supporters, including Boland, resign in protest. The subsequent people's vote backs the terms of the treaty, but Dave Valera rejects the result and in 1922 leads an attack on the 4 courts in Dublin. The National Army, led by Collins, is ordered to recapture it. And in the subsequent Battle of Dublin, Boland is murdered. Now, so Boland in real life, I believe, was actually not murdered in Dublin. I believe he was murdered far north of Dublin. So that's, once again, a very minor thing. But either way, that is a record I need to correct there. But also, talk about Dave Valera and Collins, who were the adversaries in the Irish Civil War. Now, the pro-treaty, anti-treaty, so the anti-treaty people wanted the Republic. They didn't want home rule. They wanted all the counties in Ulster. To this day, I still think that's the position that I think should have been fought a little bit harder, but it is what it is. But Collins was the pro-treaty side, and the pro-treaty was 64 out of however many, 57? So 121. And the anti-treaty were 57. So it was a pretty close struggle in the parliament there. So I can see why it was a pretty contentious thing that led to a civil war there. So, and the Civil War only lasted, I believe, about 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. So that was also a pretty short civil war, with Dave Valera getting his fucking ass kicked. He couldn't even get an army together. They were back to guerrilla tactics again, versus essentially what was unified, an Irish army under Michael Collins, along with British support, by the way, at this point, because obviously they wanted the treaty signed. So the British and Irish Irish were against Dave Valera, so Dave Valera didn't have a fucking chance. And he actually got sent again to Kilmainham jail again, where he served out the remainder of the Civil War until obviously that was over for about a year and a half or so. And then, devastated upon learning of his friend's death, Collins journeys to West Cork, where Dave Valera is in hiding to mediate the peace. Collins, however, is misdirected by Dave Valera's associates and is led into an ambush, which he is shot and killed. And the movie ends with his girlfriend, who we didn't really talk about, but she's played by Julia Roberts. Thankfully, she's not in the movie too much, and it is distracting. She's not a good casting choice, but it doesn't ruin the movie for me. But anyways, there's a love triangle going on with Boland and blah, blah, blah. He dies. She's like, oh, I'm so sad. And that's how the movie ends. With a cool little end credit thing where there's a Dave Valera quote, which is absolutely hilarious because it's the most narcissistic thing I've seen in a movie in a long time. I gotta find the quote because it is absolutely fucking hilarious. Here we are. This is so good. It is my considered opinion that in the fullness of time, history will record the greatness of Michael Collins and it will be recorded at my expense. You killed him! You killed him!
Me.
Why me? And so, I mean, that the movie's over. Eamon de Valera, even though he did lose the battle, he definitely won the war, because now we got to get into a little bit about Eamon de Valera. So after the Irish Civil War, he spent a lot of time in various offices in Irish politics, including the Prime Minister and the President more towards the end of his life, but the Prime Minister throughout much of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. So even after he lost the Civil War, he still got to be Prime Minister like 2 years after the Civil War was over, which is wild to me, but that's neither here nor there. So Dave Valera is considered, once again, a very controversial figure in Ireland to this day. He almost certainly had Michael Collins killed. A lot of people in the Amazon reviews had issues with that, but I don't know what to tell you. He absolutely was involved with his death. I don't know what to tell you if you just believe that, but it's obvious. He was the main rival in a civil war. Of course he had him killed. I don't know what to tell you. But anyway, so he was responsible for Ireland actually becoming a republic. It became a republic in 1937 and then further solidified in 1949. He was responsible for Ireland not getting involved in World War II. He was also the only Western European leader who sent condolences after Hitler killed himself. That's a fun fact of the day.
Awesome.
And he's also responsible for really solidifying Catholic social values into the Irish Constitution that were literally only overturned. The anti-divorce one was literally overturned in 1995 with a 50.5 to 49.5% vote in the country, which is crazy. And then the abortion ban in Ireland was finally overturned in 2018, but that one was a much wider margin. That was like a 70 to 30 vote. So obviously things changed a lot in like 25 years in Ireland. But either way, Eamon de Valera, very controversial. I wouldn't say he was like fascist or super right-wing, but he definitely had very right-wing tendencies, very socially Catholic. But, you know, if you like modern Republican Ireland, he's the guy you got to look back at and be like, that's the guy who did it. He really is like basically the George Washington of Ireland in a lot of ways, which is fucking weird to think about, but he is.
Someone who had this moment in history kind of foisted upon him and just had to carry it.
Exactly, yeah. But yeah, so that is the synopsis here. And before we get to our final thoughts, Brian, I am so excited to get to these Amazon reviews because I knew they would be batshit insane. I knew these would be crazy Amazon reviews. I actually had 7, but I took out 1 because I just made me so mad I didn't even want to talk about it. But I had 6 reviews here. To be honest, Brian, I think you'll like a lot of these. I'm going to be honest with you. Although 4 out of 6 of them are extremely negative reviews, but they're very funny. I promise you they're very funny, Brian. So our first review here is a 5-star review. The only 5-star review I have listed on here, even though those were the vast majority of reviews were 5-star reviews, I only have 1 5-star review here. And the head of the review says, Caladog rings. And I don't know what that means, but okay, sure. And the body of the review says, and this is in all caps, get the English out of Ireland and don't let me see one of these rings on your finger. You might try reading Leon Uris' Trinity and Redemption before you watch Michael Collins. Still a nasty mess over there. Thanks to Cromwell dumping the Protestant Scots in Northern Ireland. All of the actors and Julia Roberts were terrific. The movie's a classic and arrived way before expected. Kudos to AMZ and the bookseller. So thank you very much, sir, who did not put any punctuation. So I did that all in one go.
Just a giant runoff sentence screaming at you.
And also the only person I found that liked Julia Roberts in this movie, by the way, so I had to include that.
She's very distracting in it. Like, I don't have a problem with her, but it's very distracting.
I think the big problem with her is, and I know this is shitty to say, she's way too pretty, and she also doesn't have potato face. Everybody in this movie is Irish, but she is definitely not Irish. She is definitely not
that's
Irish.
Anglo. Her sunken in cheek. Her disgusting neck bones. We hate it.
But, you know, speaking of people who find Irish people really hot, so our next Amazon review here is from Amazon customer who gives us 3 stars. And the head of the review says, Michael Collins was a real stud. And the body of the review says, would make for excellent fiction. Astonishing, most of it is true, including the love narrative. Michael Collins was the Irishman who turned the violence onto the occupying British that heretofore had been conducted within the Irish community only upon themselves. And then the last sentence here is really hilarious but true. Only Cameron Diaz and Gangs of New York could possibly be less believable as an Irish lass than Julia Roberts, though both easy on the eyes. So thank you very much, Amazon customer, for telling us your taste in women. We really appreciate it.
I mean, she's all right. There's nothing wrong with her. I don't know. It's kind of boring.
I can tell you what, though, everybody, except for that, first guy complained about Julia Roberts. I think it's just because, there's really not that much to hate about this movie, so they have to find something. Although I do have a theory on why Julia Roberts was in this, because this movie is populated pretty much entirely by Irish and British actors, but they needed somebody that Americans could recognize.
No, that's exactly. They needed an American, a star. She is the biggest international star in the picture.
Exactly, an attractive international American. They just needed that for name recognition, so it is what it is. And then our next review here is from Alice, who gives us 2 stars, and the head of the review says, why did they have to ruin it? And the body of the review says, great revelation. They dropped the F-bomb. I don't need to watch this movie to learn about Michael Collins and his story. I don't need to be constantly bombarded with something that I can do without to watch a movie about his life. I don't need it for the story to seem realistic. I don't need to be assaulted with it. I should not have to choose between being so frequently assaulted with what is offensive, sinful language and watching this movie.
Do they even say it that much in here?
They say the F-bomb probably 10 times. It's not that much.
A few times.
Yes, Michael Collins was known for his foul language, but to have to listen to blasphemy and constant F-bombs is just not okay, especially the blasphemy. What is wrong with writers and makers of movies that this is now almost completely inescapable? I watch movies to be entertained, and movies like this to get a somewhat fictionalized glimpse into some interesting history. Can they just be a little more creative in their writing and find a way to do this without me feeling contaminated and repulsed in the first 15 minutes or so?
Feeling contaminated.
Sorry, but it's as if a middle schooler trying to be puffed up is writing the script. Surely they can do better. And also, Brian, I totally forgot. I did highlight 3 out of the 6 Amazon reviewer profiles because I'm these people have to be known for something else. And I skipped over the first guy's Amazon profile, so I want to go over it real quick. So that person, once again, L. Nye. So I don't really know too much about them. I went over some of their Amazon reviews, not super interesting, but I found one that is hilarious. So it was from a Bill O'Reilly book. They have a review of a Bill O'Reilly book called Killing the Rising Sun, How America Vanquished World War II Japan. So it's a Bill O'Reilly book, and they give it 1 star. And the body of the review says, I had to stop reading this book, having been forewarned by Mr. O that the book was not for the faint-hearted to read. Too graphic, etc. We have 2 cars made in Japan, and I went to bed last night so upset by the book. I wanted to dump those cars. I put the book away, too rattled to ever pick it up again.
Wow. This guy had a traumatic experience.
Reading a Bill O'Reilly book about Japan. And then, Alice, sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No, it's just, I've read some Bill O'Reilly books, and I would say they're pretty awful to me. I wouldn't say I was, rattled by it. You know what I mean? I wasn't oh my.
No, totally. But yeah, so Alice, I wasn't able to find, I wasn't able to find a concise one that I wanted to make fun of, but half of her reviews are there's so much anti-Catholic invective and there's so much swearing. Oh, I found one. So this is from a novel by Mary Kate the movie Marry Me by Jennifer Lopez. And the body of the review says, the header of the review is disgustingly sacrilegious. And the body of the review says, the over-the-top anti-Catholic, highly sacrilegious, very nasty dance scene with dancers dressed as nuns, lewd and nearly naked at the bottom. Vulgar language from lesbian character and several characters blaspheme multiple times. Hard to believe any of these actors could seriously even participate in this movie. Not to mention the children. So thank you very much, Alice Lovejoy. We appreciate your input here.
Yeah, this movie is part of the LGBTQIA plus agenda.
Yeah,
those prominent lesbian characters in it.
So yeah, that was a funny one. And then we have who I'm assuming is a dumb hog Wisconsinite here. So John Schmidt, which I think Smith is technically Schmidt in German. Never mind, that's not. I
think so.
Gives us 2 stars. And the head of the review says, difficult to understand the language/accent. And the body of the review
it's not.
The body of the review
says, not.
Maybe it's because I'm 69 years old, but my wife is a spry 66, and she also had a hard time understanding some conversations, in parentheses, accents. Good story and great actors, but I felt like I missed a lot. But hey, for $2.99, a couple hours, no real complaint. But they gave it 2 stars, so clearly that was a pretty big complaint.
Yeah, you couldn't understand most of the dialogue.
By the way, that is a level of like dumb hog American I didn't even know existed anymore, is somebody who's so bigoted that they can't even understand other white people's accents.
Well, okay, so I recently, for the Halloween season, rewatched Funny Man.
Yes.
And that dude's accent is pretty hard to understand at times. The accents are not hard to understand in Michael Collins. They're just not.
No, they're not. If you're an American, especially, pretty understandable accent to listen. Hibernal English is not very complicated, I'm going to be honest.
What kind of mumbling is this? I don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's just, Mr. John Schmidt, I hope you're John dead right now, I'm going to be honest. knowing this review is probably like 35 years old, so they probably are dead.
Yeah, they were probably 69 when they wrote it, so.
Yeah. And then, so our last 2 reviews are basically the same, but I'd wanted to include both of them because they're hilarious. So, Depender gives us 2 stars, and I'm assuming that is the morbidly obese wife of a troop, although I could be wrong about that. They give this, once again, 2 stars, and the head of the review says, groundbreaking terrorism. And the body of the review says, Collins is nothing more than an early version of Che Guevara. And it's like, actually, yeah, but they see that as a negative.
I mean, kind of, yeah.
As his legacy, he leaves IRA terrorism, which is arguably the prototype for today's world problems. Why does the movie industry insist on glorifying these people? I say good riddance.
The IRA is the prototype for the problems of the world today.
Don't you know,
It all starts with them. God damn it, I fucking hate these people so much. Like, beyond, like, disagreeing with their politics, which, like, obviously, they're so fucking dumb. Even if you think the IRA is bad, there is no correlation between them and the things that we in America are dealing with.
No, 100%. Unless you are literally a Northern Irish unionist, there's no reason why you should be having this opinion. I'm sorry. There really is no reason why you should be having this opinion about the IRA and Michael Collins specifically. I just don't understand how you could possibly come.
As an American, how cucked are you if you're feeling bad for the British Empire?
Well, you know, Brian, speaking of somebody who also feels bad for the British Empire, so our last review here is from Incognito Obscura, who gives us 1 star. And the head of the review says, not history, pure fiction and propaganda. And the body of their review says, this is not an accurate portrayal of either Irish history or the men who made Irish history. This is more Hollywood propaganda masquerading as history, as in the glorification of murderers such as Bonnie and Clyde, which I had to include that because I don't assume they're talking about the new Hollywood movie, but that'd be hilarious if they were. They
probably are.
But that includes a movie we already reviewed. These terrorists are glorified by Hollywood. Don't be fooled. Get a real history book about Ireland, not a movie. And, you know, this person's stupid. They are an American. And I thought to myself, well, what is a real history book that this individual might like?
Yeah,
and
that's what I'm curious about.
Would you believe it, Brian? All the novels they review, except for one, which I want to get into that review because it's hilarious, but all the books that they reviewed except for one are all about Mormon history. You know, the people who are truly historically accurate are the fucking
historians
Mormons.
Of the nation.
The Mormons. The people believe that black people were like punished by God.
The people, they care so much about historical accuracy.
And then I have one review that I want to talk about because, Brian, I think this is a book, if you've not heard of it, you might like it. But this person, once again, Incognito Obscura, who is the extremely reactionary, I'm assuming, because they're also a historian, by the way. They have a BA in history in their profile. So a Mormon historian, extreme reactionary, read a book by an individual by the name of Joseph D. Jackson. And the novel is called The Black Commandos, Warriors Forged from Blood, Sweat, and Tears, which apparently is like a Black Panther book, I believe. But either way, you know, the Mormons are very famous for their tolerance of black people, so I'm interested to hear what this guy has to say about it. And they give this one 1 star too. And the head of the review says, Advanced Hate 301. And the body of their review says, the teaser text for the French edition translates, in parentheses, White America, beware. That review tells in all, and I'll not regurgitate it here. This book is about killing all white people as a catharsis for black anger. If this is what rings your bell, go for it. Infect our young people with it, and racism may actually be our greatest problem. So you already don't consider racism to be a problem until some like Zoomer reads this book and kills white people.
Nobody's gonna read this book. So many fewer people will read this than have read the Turner Diaries or whatever.
Yeah. So that is the man who I will never want to have a conversation with. Like, I don't want to have a conversation with 95% of the Amazon reviewers, but definitely not this motherfucker.
Every thought in this guy's brain is A, stupid, but also monstrous.
By the way, I also found one that I didn't want to include in here because it was really long, but that one was also really funny. It was a guy who was like, yeah, Michael Collins is responsible for all the terrorism we get today, including Al-Qaeda and Muslim terror.
That doesn't make sense, man. Even if you don't like him or don't agree with him, that doesn't even make sense.
And his bio was hilarious. He was a, I think, bachelor's level instructor at a college. He was a petroleum fucking expert, a climate denier too on top of it.
Genius. Like, that guy's probably done more harm in his life because of that than Michael Collins has done.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, so those are our idiots in the Amazon review section here. So before we get to our pluggables, yeah, it was a bad one. I told you it was going to be a pretty rough one because I knew the negative reviews were going to be all terrible. So I was so excited. Although, interestingly enough, the vast majority of the 1 stars, except for this guy, the last idiot we talked about, were all like, oh, the DVD is stupid and it doesn't work. Like, those were all the reviews.
Those are my favorite. Those are my favorite Amazon.
Literally, there was like 50 reviews. They were like, yeah, the DVD sucks and it's broken. It doesn't work. And that was like 50.
My DVD scratched 0 stars.
But yeah, do we have any final thoughts before we get to our pluggables, Brian?
I really enjoy this film. I do think it is actually pretty beautiful. It's pretty moving. I mean, if you have politics, you probably can get a sense if your politics are like mine or Taylor's. You'll probably, find a lot that resonates with you in it. Performances are very good. It's very well made. I am going to say I would pretty much only recommend it if you are going to, the politics are going to resonate with you. There's nothing in it as a film that to me transcends that. It's not so visually or thematically rich that it can move beyond that. It follows its subject very well, especially for me, as this is a subject that I don't know a lot about, as an entry point for it. I think it does that very successfully. It's, as we said earlier, the actual style of the film is very workmanlike. It's very competent, very professionally made, and very mid-90s feeling. So yeah, I would say if this is a subject of interest to you and that you're sympathetic to, I would recommend it. Otherwise, your mileage may vary, but I don't know if it will transcend that audience.
No, totally. I'm really going to go basically off of everything you said. As somebody who's, I would say, a very minor historian, obviously, I don't have a degree in it. I don't really have any credentials. But as somebody who just loves hearing about history, especially from, left-wing sources and, especially from, independent struggles and all that, this is a movie that really did resonate with me a lot, especially as somebody who had just been to Ireland a few months ago and got to see a lot of the history in real life and, see a lot of the footsteps of these individuals who made this modern, extremely influential country. Obviously, right? It was cool finally getting to see some of the actions be appointed with some of the sites that I saw. Once again, the Kilmainham Jail or, St. Stephen's Green, which isn't even one I talked about, but I went to that when I was in Ireland. I was actually staying just a few doors down from it, but that was one of the main sites of the Easter Uprising too. That was where the field hospital for the Easter Rising was and stuff like that. Seeing the actual events be portrayed in the sites that I saw was really interesting. And if you're, I would say, even moderately interested in modern Irish history or even post-colonial history, I think this is a great movie to watch. Performances are great. The one problem, though, I will have, Brian, and this is something that we didn't even get to at the very end of the movie, but if Michael Collins lived now, he would be an old-ass millennial because he died at 31 years old. Isn't that crazy to think about?
Yeah, actually, I got to this movie, I was like, he was younger than I am. Fuck.
Isn't it amazing? He was the leader of a country at 30 years old. Isn't that crazy to think about? At 30
stresses me out to think about, man.
I mean, it's shocking. And the fact that he was the second in command of the army that liberated Ireland in his 20s. Crazy to think about. Genuinely crazy to think about. What the fuck have we done with our lives? Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I did think that when I heard his age, I was like, oh, he was an aging millennial now, is where he'd be at.
Nowadays, if Michael Collins existed, he would just be hanging out with his fucking Funko Pops.
He'd be having anxiety when he got a phone call.
He'd be an epic Marxist online.
Yeah.
Oh, God. But yeah, so yeah, that definitely was another relevant point. Because I'm he died at 31 years old. Are you fucking kidding me? Because I'm 31.
Ooh.
I'm fuck.
Yeah. You just feel your heart sink when you hear that.
A man who's literally the president of what is now a major country.
A leader of a revolution, truly.
Oh my God, Jesus Christ. Yeah, so needless to say, that was definitely a funny moment in my head when I was finishing up this movie. I'm like, oh my God, this whippersnapper, fuck. He did this shit. But yeah, so, and also, once again, so Liam Neeson, when he made this movie, was actually in his early 40s. And he's also way taller. So talk about the standards of civilization Ireland was in. Michael Collins was called the big fella because he was very tall. You don't want to know how tall he was, Brian?
What was it? How tall? Tell me.
He was 5'11" and he was called the big fella. He was 5'11".
Well, in Ireland, that's huge. That's like a giant there.
Oh,
They're
no,
all,
for
like,
sure.
5'2".
But nowadays, people be like, yeah, 5'11". Most women won't even talk to you on dating sites at 5'11". You know what I mean? So it's kind of funny to think about the standards. But also, Liam Neeson in real life is like apparently 6'4". So I saw some people who were complaining about him being too old and too tall. And I'm like, guys, his accent is perfect.
For an actor, that is extremely tall.
Yeah, they should get fucking Barry Keoghan if they do a remake in the lab, because he's the same age, basically. I think he's our age.
Oh, that would be so awesome.
Get Barry Keoghan to play fucking Michael Collins. Oh, Jesus. But yeah, so that is our review of Michael Collins. So once again, watch it, love it, go to Dublin, go to Temple Bar, get really drunk and do your best shitty Irish accent. They will love it, especially if you're in Temple Bar and you whip out your dick and piss in a corner while saying like, I am I'm a wee lass, and start wearing all green and say, I'm a little leprechaun. Do that in Ireland. They will love you. The Garda will definitely not beat your ass. They will definitely not throw you in jail. Which, by the way, is hilarious because when I went to Ireland, I was trying to find a guy that had a t-shirt that said "Blow me, I'm Irish," but I could not find one. I was like, damn it, where are these people?
You had to find a store that only sold them?
Trust me, there were plenty of those. There were plenty of those who had shitty novelty Irish t-shirts. And of course they were around Temple Bar and stuff like that. That's like the big shitty American tourist area. But
whatever. No.
But either way, I will not spoil everybody's experiences to Ireland before they go there. So before I say any more, let's get into our pluggables here. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well, please follow and subscribe to both our Spotify and our YouTube channel, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well, once again, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. Of course, our good friends Scott, Sean, Robert are creating a fantastic little series. Need a little bit more moral and financial support to get there. So please donate to their great campaign. And as well as always, if you donate to their campaign, just send us an email, fucking comment on YouTube, do whatever. And within reason, we will match your donation like $25. So just do your part. We will do our parts to help our good friends Scott, John, Robert to get their project off the ground.
Yeah. As well, you can follow us at Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram and Threads, which will be tied to our Instagram account, where you can argue with me about media. People love arguing with me on Threads, but Threads is great for that. If you would like to find either us at Millennials Are Old Pod or me personally at JLo Biafra, please, I keep getting yelled at by boomers and Gen Xers. I don't know what I'm doing. And you can also follow us at Millennials Are Old, the Facebook page on Facebook, although I'm getting tired of being yelled at on Facebook. I might be committed more to getting yelled at by random waves of people on Threads now.
Yes. And so you said both Instagram and the Facebook, right?
Yeah. So they're tied. They're tied together. They're like,
okay. Good. Yes. So, it's one of those things I keep seeing Threads posts on Instagram, but I just have not dedicated myself to it. Is it really good or is it just as shitty?
I like it because I grew up on message boards and then I was an early adopter of Twitter. And what I will say is the thing with Twitter was that you used to just be able to post your thoughts and people would find your tweets, right? And you would kind of find people that, for better or worse, you could just find people to interact with. And Threads is kind of like that. If I make a post about a certain type of niche music or a type of film, people that know what I'm talking about will find my thread. And some of them are annoying, usually well-intentioned, but annoying. I don't know. I like Threads, but I also liked Twitter about 15 years ago. It's that kind of deal.
No, totally, 100%. It's one of those things where a lot of social media sites, if they start off really good, they end up becoming shitty. It seems like they're exponentially becoming shittier faster and faster nowadays. Exactly. There used to be social medias that used to be good for years and then became shitty, but now it's they're good for a month and then they become shitty.
Well, I remember 10 years ago, I remember saying with my friends, Twitter sucks so much now. It's so bad. Its best days are behind it.
If only you knew.
It's so bad. So no, I like Threads, especially if you're like me and you just like to talk about, I'll make a post about some pop culture thing, about some bands I'm learning about, and I'll get 50 people replying to my tweet who are all people that, I don't know, which I think is cool. I know some people might think that's stressful or not be interested in talking, having that many people interact with them, but your mileage may vary.
I would say as long as they're not super hostile, it wouldn't bother me. So even if they're hostile in a funny way, if they're hostile in a funny way, then it's fine.
Actually, let me give you my biggest problem on Threads is I like to talk about very specific music stuff that I'm into. So I'll make a post hey, I'm looking for I made a post today. There's I'm looking for books about a very specific subset of leftist post-punk. Now this is a very specific thing, but it's a type of music that blends Northern Soul and jangle pop and kind of skinhead music music, and it doesn't really have a name. And I got like a million replies. First of all, nobody recommended me books. They all said, have you heard Gang of Four? Have you ever heard of The Clash? Have you ever heard of Crass? Like just naming off any leftist post-punk band they could think of, like well-intentioned. Yeah. And I was like, well, no, I'm looking for books about a very specific thing. And you don't want to be a dick because they're just trying to contribute and help you out, you know? But I wanted to say to someone, would I be making this post if I hadn't heard about Gang of Four?
Exactly, right?
Come on.
Yeah. Oh, God. So, yes, definitely subscribe to all of our social medias as well. And you know what? I do want to say I just thought of something. I just remembered because I wanted to mention it earlier in the episode. Happy episode 69, because this is episode 69. And I feel like
Taylor, I think we're going to have to celebrate tonight.
We fucking might have to. Because, like, I remember the last time I did an episode 69 of another podcast, we also reviewed a really good movie. I vividly remember how good of a review that was. I'll probably post the link to it.
Please do. If I had thought about it being episode 69, I would have worn something special for you.
God, I'm wearing something special, and that's literally nothing right now. I'm just completely naked right now.
See, that's not special for me. That's just how I record.
You hang out with all the other people in downtown Portland.
I sit in Pioneer Courthouse Square recording completely naked.
All right, but speaking of people who are pioneers in other fields, just like Michael Collins, I'm going to be a pioneer in falling asleep because I'm tired of shit and I'm an old-ass millennial. So have a good night, everybody. Brian, I hope you are able to fall asleep naked in Pioneer Square like all your friends can.
What else is new?
All right, so have a good night, everybody. And also, up the RA 32, is it 26 plus 6 equals 1, free Ireland. Have a good night, everybody.